Hi friends, it is a beautiful summer feeling day here in the garden, and I'm going to be out doing a little bit of prep work for the second phase of the flower bed I want to put by my new walkway. So previously I went through, talked about the walkway I put in, which is really the beginning to hopefully a future runoff of the walkway going in other places. And I already planted one side with a lot of perennials that in the future are going to really take care of themselves, be somewhat drought tolerant, be really resistant to rabbits eating on them, anything like that. And really every year just die back to the ground, mulch back into the ground, and then be able to come up fresh. And so I'm doing some of the same approaches to this new bed, to this pathway, with a few changes. I am still going to be putting in perennials, really easy care perennials, ones that I don't have to do a lot of maintenance on year to year, but I'm going to utilize a lot of grasses in this new area with more flowering perennials just mixed in. So it's a little bit more of a prairie style, but I never follow rules, so it's my version of it, I suppose. And it's going to be a lot of drop seed grass with some switchgrass, and then a few different perennials mixed in for some color. And I'm going to use a lot of the same process that I did on the previous bed. I'm going to work in some amendments here in the beginning, but I want to show you kind of the layout of this area and where I'm working so you can kind of see the differences between the two flower beds. Previously, I've planted all along what is the west side really, and it has a big evergreen backdrop, and all these perennials are sun-loving, easy care perennials, from baptisias to beautiful hyssop, I love hyssop, to goldstem rudbeckias. We have some calamint, we have alliums, we have beautiful salvias, and all these are going to mix together easily. But now what we're doing is we're going to come around the corner. I had a big millstone put down here on the corner just kind of as a piece kind of element to enjoy. And this bed now is going to be all along this other side of the bed. And you can see it going right down here. So I've already started placing some of my amendments, and I used the same method for removing all the sod. I used a sod cutter and then removed it and have been working the ground. Whenever it's a new flower bed, I like to work the ground, make sure it's going to be easier to manage, and also work in the amendments with a tiller. So that's what we're going to start with, is just working these in. I'm using the exact same amendments that I used in the previous one. I'm going to do the Land and Sea compost from Espoma. I would usually use my own compost. Mine this year, I don't have a pile that's ready. I have multiple piles, but none of them have quite sat long enough in the heat and being turned enough to be able to be ready to look like this gorgeous compost. This is really what you want compost to look like. You want it to look nice and rich, be really beautiful, just fall apart like this. It has lots of nutrients in it. And so mine is not like this. So I'm gonna be using the same Land and Sea compost, and then I will be putting plant tone on the area too, just for a more general all-purpose fertilizer. I tilled everything in with the tiller, and now I've just been going with a rake here and smoothing it out slightly. It's really a pretty simple process. And what I find is, in the past I haven't always amended my flower beds, but when I take the time to do it, I have a much better soil structure. Things usually do much better in the end. There's better drainage, you're working extra nutrients into the soil, and it just gets your plants off to a really good start. So what I want to do now is go over some of the plants I'm using. They're a little bit different. To some people, they're going to seem boring because they have a little bit right now just a green look, but a lot of them do bloom in time. It will have to give them a little bit of time to bloom. But what I like is they're going to be very easy care. So this is a big area of soil that's exposed. Obviously mulching, it's going to help suppress the weeds, retain the moisture, but over time I want the plants to do that on their own. I want them to take care of themselves. I want them to really establish and naturalize into this area. So we'll talk about why I'm choosing these, because as you know, I am not someone that has an extensive watering system, and also I want to choose plants that don't need extensive watering systems. I want them to be able, when we get dry in the summer, to be able to handle that, to manage that, and still thrive. So one of the first plants I have that really does well in the areas I just talked about is it's just a drop seed grass. And it's the Terra variety of a prairie drop seed. So it stays maybe slightly smaller than other prairie drop seed, but it has that same effect. And what I like about it is, you can see here it does get those small seed heads and plumes on them, but really it just has a nice kind of flowy look to it that does really well and really naturalizes into its area. It's clump forming. Obviously that clump will get larger. These are small starts to begin with, but they will get bigger and have these nice clumps as it grows. And also what I like about having a lot of clumps, because you can see I'm going to do quite a few of them, I like that they kind of have this almost wave effect of grass, where it looks like these mounds and a wave kind of as you look at them, and I really like that. So the idea is to have a backdrop of drop seed grass and then mix in some perennials here and there that will add some color. So one of the first easy ones I'm picking is just a bee balm. So a Monarda. This is a newer one. It's that Sugar Buzz Cherry Pops. And what's nice about this newer hybrid is that it is a little bit better at staying to itself, as in most bee balms are really good at naturalizing and taking over an area, which can be really good in certain spots, and I do like that sometimes. But in this case, I want to do one that will stay a little bit more of a clump forming one, but still have that showy color, attract the pollinators, which this will do, really adapt to the area, which I like. And then also, you know, one of my favorites I'm going to use here is I'm just going to do the Baptisia, that wild indigo. Now this is not the original native, which would have been a wild white. It would have had just a white, and it gets much taller than this even. And I really like that one too, but here I did want to go with just the wild indigo, which is this bluish purple color. I really like it. It gets nice, large, very large plants in the end, and they take a while to establish themselves, but you do want to make sure you have them in a spot where you don't want to move them because their root systems will get quite large, and you want to make sure you have enough room for them because the clump gets quite big someday in the future. So I like that mix. But then I have one other grass I'm going to mix into this, and that's these back here. I'm going to do some of the Shenandoah switchgrass, which is one of my favorite grasses actually. It's a clump forming one, but it's a switchgrass, so it will go beyond its clump and start forming new grass that you can break off and kind of transplant in the spring if you want to, and the mound gets larger and larger. But what I like is the coloring on this. It gets really open seed head plumes during the summer. It gets some red and wine tinged leaves on it as it gets towards autumn. It's a really pretty grass, and it will really be nice mixed in with all these others. So what I want to do is start laying these out, and I'm going to do it very haphazard. While I did draw this out and had somewhat of a plan, and I'm going to roughly go by it, I am also someone that likes to go by my eye. So when I'm sitting out here and I'm just setting plants out, I feel a lot better about how I can do that as I'm just kind of going around and setting them out. So that's what I'm going to do, is take my plants, set them out, space them, and I want them to eventually touch and clump together. So I'll be spacing them about 2 feet apart on those prairie drop seed grasses, and eventually they can get 24 to 36 wide, so that will nicely let them flow into each other. So how I'm doing this is really a grid system, and pretty much I envision it as being a grid of all of the Terra drop seed, but then replacing what would be a drop seed with one of the perennials kind of intermix, because what I want is a height differential. You know, I think we all too often think everything tall has to be in the back, and then medium, and then small in front. And I don't want this to be like this. I want this to be more of a naturalistic, kind of this more haphazard prairie. Again, this is just more of a personal preference of what I want to look for. So I'm, interplacing some bee balm and then some Baptisia into this grassy area. But I want the whole first row to be this drop seed, so it will all be a little bit lower. And eventually I could replace some of them too if I want to. But again, remember, these are not going to stay all perfect clumps for their life. They're going to naturalize, they're going to get larger, and they're going to grow into each other. Both of these new perennial beds I've planted, like the one behind me and this new one I'm doing right now, I want nature to run its course. I want it to take hold and really do what it wants to in these areas, and I'm trying to give it that benefit of being able to do that. In the past, I so often have so many beds in areas where I try to wrangle nature. I try to keep everything prim and proper and perfect, and I really want this area to be one where it goes how it wants to. They move, they naturalize, they grow into these spaces, they touch each other, they fully encase the area, so eventually I don't even have to continue to mulch it. It will mulch itself with their debris every winter. In the spring it will come anew. So really that's what I'm hoping. So I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna start planting. It's that easy. That's the hard part, but also the fun part. So I have most of the plants planted. I have a few left over that I will intersperse here towards the back. And this area is not going to get all the way done this year. What I am going through and doing right now is watering everything really well. So until I get the mulch put on, which we'll do here most likely tomorrow, the daylight is going away and I'm kind of getting tired. So I'm going to water everything really well tonight, and then we'll work on mulch here just to finish it up. But you know, one of the great things about a perennial bed like this is that it's a living bed. It's going to evolve and change and grow over time and fill in. That's really what I want here. So I'm going to finish up watering everything tonight. I have my water wand, and I'm going to just make sure everything gets a good drink. Remember, those root balls are not large on the plants. Those roots are not going to branch out into the native soil right away. It's going to take a little bit of time. So watering them is going to be key. And then once they get adapted, once they really get established, then they become much more drought tolerant. But until then, they definitely need water. Hello friends, it is the next day. So I took a quick stop overnight just because it was getting late. And now I've finished up, and I kind of want to go over everything I did plant, talk about a couple things that changed in my head and that I just adjusted. That's how gardening is for me. Even though sometimes I draw it out, this side I didn't draw out as extensively as the other side. And as I've been doing it, I've just reworked slightly some placement, and I wanted to show you that. In the end, I decided I wanted some clumps of color as opposed to just one, and over time let that clump get bigger. So I'm gonna do groupings of three. 3 of the Baptisia, 3 or sometimes just a single of the Monarda. And I'm gonna do that just kind of spursed together. So I will need a few more plants, but we're never done with gardening. And if we were, what would be the point? We have to always have something we're gonna continue to do. So let me show you where I'm at. So when we're walking down, you can see this is the planting area, and they're hard to see, but there's these little prairie seed drop grasses, the Terra variety, every few feet. But then I am now gonna mix in sometimes a grouping of 3 of the Monarda. So I'll put another Monarda here and have a grouping of 3 that comes up to the pathway. I'll do the same thing with Baptisia, and you can see I didn't have quite enough. So I will place in the 3rd in some of these groupings later on, and I'll show you in stories or something after. But this is just kind of my process, and I like to take you through that and see, you know what, it's perennials. I just put them in, they can be moved around if they want to be. But really what it is there's an underlying grid system pretty much of the prairie drop seed. And that's what, as it grows, you're gonna start seeing is almost this grid pattern at first before it just grows into each other. And then in the back, I have groupings of 3 of that Shenandoah switchgrass, which will be a little taller, but also those tinges of red. That's what I'm really excited for in the fall, that color. But I'm gonna now start just putting on some mulch, because now that I have all this planted, I want to put on hardwood mulch. Mulch can really bring out a lot of different opinions. I use hardwood mulch, but the important thing when planting perennials like this that I want to naturalize is doing the right amount of mulch. You don't want to make it too thick. About 2 inches is all I'm going to do, because I want these plants to be able to grow and expand into the mulch. That's also why I'm doing mulch, and I don't want to do rock or anything. I want these plants to take over, and someday I won't need to mulch at all. They will self-decompose over the winter. That will be a mulch in itself. I'll probably just mow it down with a push mower in the spring. So eventually that's what will happen. But before that, the hardwood mulch is going to suppress any weeds, and it's going to retain all that moisture when I do need to water them, because until they're established, they will need water. I get my mulch in bulk, and I have a big pile delivered. I'm actually still working on a big pile I had delivered last year because I knew I was going to use a lot this year. And then I just pile it on the gator and I bring it over, and I just use a scoop shovel. Now, you can use bagged mulch, of course, too. I don't like to use anything with dyes, anything that's treated with colors or anything, because that's gross and it's unnatural. It makes no sense. So instead, I just use this untreated, all natural mulch, and I make clumps all around, and then I'll go in and spread those clumps. Now, it's going to take a few loads of the gator until I can actually have enough to spread, but it's just a good way to start by making those clumps. And this way I can be careful too, since I'm doing it by hand. I can control where I'm putting it, kind of watch for those plants, because some of these grasses are so small that I could cover them up and not realize where they were. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to leave little piles all around, and then by hand, just smooth that all out. I'm doing the last final kind of putting the mulch around by hand. And let me just tell you, in filming this, I've stopped 3 or 4 times because all at once a windstorm came through. Then we got a couple tints of rain, which I'm totally happy with. So you might notice that the coloring is different because now this is wet, or it might look a little different. That's because I've been stopping and starting and running to the shed when I need to get out of the wind and the rain, but I'm happy for any rain we get. I'm finishing up just with a little bit of mulch, but then let's do a walkthrough where I can kind of show you where it started, where it's going into this other bed too beside it, and kind of give you a quick walk through the whole area. I thought we could start at the beginning of the path and just get a whole rundown from the beginning to the end since I've done multiple videos on this. It has some shade, so I've done some Aurelia. This is actually the Gotimba variety that gets even bigger. It is dry shade, so I'm gonna have to supplement this with water. I have some various hosta, I have some sub and substance hosta. But as you work down, we get to the area that I just planted today. Now, you'll notice there are unplanted areas because I can only do so much at once, and I like to work in stages. So I will get some more and come down and finish this side here, but that's for another day. So I do have my blower here, just my leaf blower, because that's how I clean off the path when I'm done. Any type of path, gravel, anything else, you want to make sure you blow it off every so often because any debris that gets in it will slowly create a soil that could foster an area for weeds. If you keep it blowing out and clean, you'll have less weeds. But now you're gonna see this mix of plantings. At the moment, you don't see them all because some of these grasses are really small and hard to see. But there's a lot of this drop seed grass, the Terra variety, and I'm super excited about it because eventually there are gonna be these beautiful tufts and mounds all throughout here around Baptisias, around Monarda. That's that beautiful kind of pop of red this one's gonna be. And then there are gonna be groupings of some of these. I'm gonna get more Monarda and do groupings of 3 right there, and kind of on down the path have different various groupings of color amongst all of these grasses in between that will just be a really nice, almost ground cover of sorts. And then as you walk on down this path, you're gonna notice even while I'm doing this video, all at once I thought, I actually want a little stepping kind of walkway, stepping stone area, because sometimes I have to get back behind these trees to water some things that are beyond. So I happen to have, I got 2 of these millstones at an auction, but then they came with a whole bunch of the pieces that would have made a couple more. So I'm gonna use those as stepping stones, kind of sink them down to the ground, then I'll put mulch around those too. But then on down here is the previous perennial bed I did with lots of Millennium allium, calamint, Caradonus salvia, and all of this is gonna be in full bloom. So these 2 sides are gonna work together that are really an offshoot and they vary a lot from how I used to plant around here. I'm slowly starting to try to have new beds be a little bit easier on me. Not only on me, but also be better for the environment, be better for pollinators. I am not an expert in natives, and that's never been my goal, but it's to plant things that pollinators will love, that will do well on their own, that will benefit the ecosystem, and also benefit me in the sense I don't have to take care of them as much. So it's really a win-win, and that's what this whole new pathway garden is. It has lots of elements that I haven't usually done, and it takes me out of my comfort zone. And I think that's important in gardening, that while certain things, maybe sometimes certain looks, are what we think we have to do, but over time you realize you can gravitate and you can start doing things that maybe have more benefit, and maybe you'll grow accustomed to liking them even more. You know, I used to think I didn't like haphazard things that naturalized, meaning they grew more plants and grew bigger and bigger. But then I started seeing the benefits of that and how that can work really well. So that's what this is kind of, my new experimental garden is really leaning into those plants and letting them do their thing. So I'll of course always be taking you along for the ride. I like to just form these as casual, come garden with me, and guess what? I change things up. I decide things differently. I sometimes change course mid-video, but I want you to see that because that's what gardening is. It's learning, it's growing, and it's learning from your mistakes and getting to know more. I have a constant curiosity and excitement about gardening, and I hope I can continually evolve and learn more and adapt my garden as I do so. So I hope you saw that. If you enjoyed it, please share this video around. Of course, that always helps me, but it helps everyone else too see that gardening is doable. You don't have to always hire an expert. You can try to do things on your own. You can troubleshoot, you can learn, and you can grow, just like the plants. So until next time, get out there, garden, enjoy it. That's the point.